Hello everyone and welcome back to my YouTube channel. This is Cassie. Today I have a couple of tags for you that I made as a collaboration between Heffy Doodle and Studio Katia. And so let's talk about what we're going to be using. We're going to be using the Otter side stamp set. This adorable little stamp set is just adorable. I love all the little punny sentiments. And we're also going to be using the matching dies that come with it, or not come with it, that you can get separately. And then I also have the Wave to Me stencil, and then we're going to be using the Numicon stencil. These are both from Heffy Doodle. We're going to kind of put them over the top of each other, and it should be pretty fun. And now to the Studio Katia products. We're going to be using some dies. This is the dotted shaker tag, #1, and then this one is the slider tag die. Love it. And this is how it's going to work. I went ahead and did a little prototype, and I'm super stoked about that die. And then we're also going to be using these sapphire crystals. These are the September crystals. They are gorgeous, so vibrant. We'll be using both of those. I have out my waffle flower media mat along with some Bristol smooth cardstock, and I'm going to be doing this to about 3 pieces. I have my mini ink blending tool and some Tumbled glass distress oxide ink, and so I am just going to go ahead and put that all over, blend that all over that piece of Bristol smooth cardstock. I have it trimmed down to, I don't even know what size, but it's roughly about the right size of the tags. And I put some Heffy Doodle tape on my hands just to make sure I didn't get some of that ink all over my hands, even though I still did. All right, now I've got the stencil. This is the Wave to Me stencil, and it doesn't stick right now, so I'm going to use some Pixie spray on that because it's a fairly delicate stencil. And then I've learned that the best way to blend with this one is to go from left to right or side to side. Trying to go up and down is just going to move your stencil, and you really don't want to do that. So this is what it shows, and I'm just going to move it up and down, and it will have a little bit of a crossover in the middle, but you really won't be able to tell with that. I did that for all 3 pieces, and now we're going to move on to our Numicon stencil. I just put that right over the top, and this color that I'm using is the Blueprint Sketch. What I used for the wave was Mermaid Lagoon. And I'll do the same thing. I'll just move this down, and I don't even care that it's not going to line up. It really isn't that big of a deal. You'll barely notice. So we'll just set that off to the side, but that is going to be all 3 that I'm going to do. And now this is Distress Oxide, so I want that splatter on the background because this is supposed to look like a water background. So I'm just going to spritz some water onto an acrylic block and then splatter it all over using a paintbrush. And then I'll let that sit for a second and then wipe it up with my microfiber cloth. So there's how all 3 of them look. I think that's so fun. And I do want to die cut these, so I'm going to try and make sure that these are very good and dry. Our next step would be to do some stamping. I'm going to stamp out a couple of the little otters from the Otter side stamp set using some Memento Tuxedo black ink, and I'm stamping that onto Express It cardstock. I also have the little present off to the side. I'm not going to stamp that with my Misty. I'm just going to stamp that with an ink block or a stamp block a couple times. So let's go on to our coloring. I've put the colors up on the screen for you, and I am just going to color these pretty easy. They're fairly small images, so you wouldn't have to go too crazy with your blending or using too many colors. And I'm already starting to notice that my E57 is getting a little bit dry, so I'm going to have to fill that again, refill it. Seems like once you start refilling, I'm constantly having to refill. So I'll bring in my darker shade, and it looks like a hot mess when I do my darker shades, but it's where I blend it back out that it starts to look a little bit better. So I'll bring in that E57 one more time and then just kind of blend those out so that I don't have such a harsh line, and then even fill in some of the color that I missed. But yeah, that's basically how I like to do my Copic coloring. I start with my lighter color and then move on to my darker color. For his little tummy, we're using E23, and then we're going to bring in the E57 just as a little bit of shading for that E23. And then I'm going to move on to the next little guy, and he's basically going to be done the same way, but I show the coloring because it is so different. I mean, not so different. The little image is pretty different, so the shading would be in a different area. But I really don't have a rhyme or a reason to why I put the shading where I do. I just kind of put it down, just putting it where I think it might look good. And so no one's really going to be critiquing exactly where you put your shading. You put it where you want and where you think it might look good. So here's where that Copic is very, very dry. So I'm definitely going to have to refill that bad boy before I move on too much. We'll bring in our next darker color. So I went from lightest to darkest, and then I'll bring in my E57 again and shade those out, or just pull that color out just a little bit so it's not so harsh. And then we're going to bring in our E23 again for his tummy, and we'll even put a little bit on his face. And then we'll color in his nose with E49 and R24 for the red in his mouth, and then on the packages. And I don't bring in another color for shadowing. It's just too small of an image. I just didn't think it was necessary. And then I bring in the Y35 for the other part of the package. And now I'll bring in the matching dies and tack that down with a little bit of purple tape. So that way I can get all those little guys all put down. I love how these dies cut out around their hands so that they can be holding those presents. I just think it's just ingenious. I love that Heffy Doodle does that. It's one of my favorite things about some of their dies. All right, now to bring in the slider tag and the shaker. I'm going to put those right on top of that paper and tack that down with a little bit of purple tape. So I'll need one of each of those. And you'll notice that because I did use Distress Oxide, I am going to bring in some scratch paper because sometimes that has a tendency to cross over. You'll notice that I have some purple tape on my dotted tag, just holding the little center cut. I hold that in place there. You wouldn't even have to cut it out if you didn't want to. I went ahead and cut it out, but I'm just keeping it tacked down where I want it. So that way when I run it through for both my pieces, it'll line up. And so now we're going to start assembling our slider. So it will cut or put the score lines in for your slider piece itself. Just make sure that you use a bone folder or something to make sure it has a good slide. And then I'm going to just kind of line up the blue piece that I cut out. That blue piece uses some Cookie Monster cardstock by Heffy Doodle. I'm going to mark on my back part of my tag just where the corners are so that I know when I put my sentiment down. And I went ahead and I stamped it onto some this is some Oreo Crunch cardstock by Heffy Doodle. I stamped that with some embossing ink and then covered that with some white embossing powder. And it does give a little bit of dimension on that background, which is fine, but you'll notice that I do have a little bit of catch. So if you're going to do this, I would add a little bit more dimension than what I do. All right, so here I am kind of trying to figure out where I want my sentiments, and then I'll glue those down just with a little bit of glue. But like I said, when I do my slider, it keeps getting caught on Otterly, but I work it enough and I make sure and use my bone folder to push down my piece enough so that it will start to eventually just kind of go over the top of it, no problem. But I do have issue at first. And then I'm just going to erase the little pencil lines that I put down. And then we're going to put some 1/8 inch score tape on that little flap. I'm going to show you here in a second. That little flap has a notch that was scored into it. And it's also on this little blue piece. So this is the piece that goes right behind my slider. And you'll notice there's where the notch is there. You're going to want to line those two pieces up. And then that way you know that you have it perfectly centered. I'm going to use some foam tape behind my top piece, and this wouldn't necessarily be something you had to do, but because I stamped my sentiments onto some cardstock and put that behind, I wanted to make sure that I had plenty of room for my slider to actually slide. So I'll peel off the release paper and then I'll stick my back part of my tag down, and then we'll work the slide. See, this is where it kind of gets a little bit caught, but it's not a big deal. If you just keep working it, it will eventually not have too much of a problem. So I just keep working that. I did cut out the little reinforcers for my tag using that same Cookie Monster cardstock. And so I'll just put one on front and back. So that way, because the recipient's going to be moving that a lot, you just want to make sure that it's good and reinforced. And that's what I was talking about with the little Otter. He can hold the present. So I glued that on him. And then I'm just putting glue on the lower half of him. You don't want to put it all over him because when you try to use your slider, he won't be able to work. So it's got to just be on the very bottom part of him. And then we're going to move on to our shaker before I do anything else with like embellishing both tags. I have a couple pieces of acetate and I have some 1/8 inch score tape. I'm going to stick down that acetate. It's actually a transparency sheet, and I'll have that linked down below. So that way I've got my window on front of my shaker, and now we actually have to get our shaker ready. So I did double up this foam tape because I want to make sure that my sequins have plenty of room to move around, or my jewels. So I'm putting that all around the window of the shaker, making sure that I don't have any areas where anything can come out. And then I'll peel off all the release paper, and then I'll stick those little gems inside. These gems are just gorgeous. And I do want to flip them over because I want to make sure that the really pretty part is facing the front. So I'll flip all those over just to make sure. And then when I'm happy with that, I'll take my back piece of my acetate, my last piece, and I'll put that down. This is just a little trick. It makes sure that I can place my tag on top, no issue, and get everything lined up and not have to worry about the sequins or your jewels or anything sliding out. And I will use a little bit of liquid glue just to make sure that where that acetate is, it'll still stick. So there you have the shaker ready to go. And I'm going to put a little present in this little otter's paw, and then we'll glue him to the front as well. And then we'll move on to the baker's twine and also our sentiments. And then we're also going to embellish. So I've got a little embellishment tray sitting there. I got that from the Twiddler's Nook. And then I will use some baker's twine to put inside of my tag, or not inside, for the upper part of my tag. And then I'm going to tie a little bow around that first one, my slider tag. Just that way it reinforces the tag even that much more. And then I'll trim off the excess. And then I'm actually going to double up my baker's twine for my shaker tag because it's a little bit more, well, that slit is there and it just makes it a little bit more, I don't know, heavy duty, I guess. All right, so we'll work him. And like I said, we'll cut double for this one. And we'll do the exact same thing with this. I'm kind of not really showing you how I put it on there. I just stick, I fold them together and then stick all those through the center. And then my frayed pieces, those go into the middle, and then I just pull through, and then I'll tie a knot at the top. I ran some of the Oreo Crunch cardstock through my Xyron sticker maker because I want to use the words for and you that came with the slider tag die. I'm going to run that through my die cutting machine a couple times for each one. I don't do 3, I just do a couple. And then I'll get ready to start adhering all my sentiments. I went ahead and stamped the sentiment Otterly Adore You, just like I did before for the inside slider bits. And these are going to go on the outside of my shaker. Otterly Adore You, love it. And then we'll peel off the release paper for the words for and you, and we'll stack those up. And then we'll peel off the release paper on the back of those once we realize where we want them. And then I'll just put those down. That Xyron sticker maker is fantastic for these little sentiments like this. And I'll just push those down pretty good so they aren't going anywhere. And now it's time to embellish. I'm using my crystal katana along with some of that liquid glue, and I'm just going to pick up all those little gems and place those down on top. I love how these 2 little tags turned out. It's fantastic. Now this is a part of a blog hop, so I'm going to have my blog linked down below so that you can head on over there and check out what everybody else made for the collaboration. You won't want to miss it. And then I'll have all that information linked down below, along with all the products that I used. If you liked this video, please hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already done so. I typically have 3 to 4 videos a week, and I'd love it if you kept coming by. And as always, thank you so much for stopping by, and I will see you very soon in another video. Thanks, everybody.